When I was 3 years old, my mother started a tradition she called the Golden Memory Box. At the end of every December, with the Christmas tree still sparkling in the corner of our living room, and me off playing with whatever exciting new toys Santa had brought me, and there were always a lot of toys, regardless of whether the money spent on them should have been used to pay the rent, Mom would turn on Nat King Cole and ceremoniously waltz around the house collecting treasures from the past 12 months. She would carefully stack my most precious drawings, paintings, rocks, and seashells from our walks, and the hundreds of photos she'd taken of my every step in a large box. Then, with a ballpoint pen and her giant, round, larger-than-life handwriting, she would label it Chrysta's Golden Memory Box, along with the year and a few elaborately drawn hearts and stars. When my little sister Caitlin arrived a year and a half later, a second box was added to the tradition, though the boxes became much more disorganized, and eventually years were skipped and the tradition slowly died. Sometimes, on a random Saturday, my mother would suggest that we take a trip down memory lane and slide a chance year's box out from under her bed. On one such afternoon, a few months after learning about our extended biological family, I sat cross-legged on the floor as we dug through one labeled Chrysta 1993. Unlike other tours into the past, this time I noticed something about my childhood that didn't add up. I pulled out dozens of photos of me and my father, pictures of him hugging me at my 9th birthday party, others of me sitting on his lap while he strummed a song on his old acoustic guitar, yet more of him chasing Caitlin and me around the house as the tickle monster, and I realized I had no recollection of him being around then. Not a single memory was attached to a single photograph. I felt like a stranger looking at my life. I thought to myself, look, he must have been there. But I could not recall him visiting even once in 1993. I kept rummaging through the box and came upon a framed 8x10 photograph, professionally shot, of two little foxes snuggling in the snow. For months in 1993, I'd been obsessed with this particular animal, and upon seeing the images, I was immediately taken back to the delight I'd felt when I'd unwrapped this gift. I turned the frame over, and on the back, in Sharpie in my mother's giant round handwriting, was a note. To Chrysta Bear. Love, Mommy, and... But it stopped there. While I did not remember the moments captured in the photographs with my father, I did recollect every minute detail of the woman whose name was now hidden in whiteout, erased haphazardly by my mother. I call it haphazard because if you really looked, you could still see her name. Sitting on the floor now, staring down at, on the one hand, photos of Dad during times I hardly remember him being around, and, on the other hand, the deliberate removal of the name of someone whose presence still felt meaningful to me all these years later, I realized these boxes weren't memory boxes at all, but a heavily curated version of my life, the way my mother hoped I would remember it. There were no empty bags of cocaine in the boxes, or eviction notices from landlords, or photos of the father who had lost most of his teeth while living in a broken-down motorhome on Pico. There was no trail of the broken hearts our mother left behind as she bounced from one girlfriend to the next to survive and provide for us. No photos of our childhood cats and dogs who we'd loved and who were later sent to live on a farm when we had to move into yet another friend's home while Mom got back on her feet. And while many more handsome and put-together photographs of our father did exist, it was because, as I'd later learn, my mother had paid him to be there. A dozen times a year, Mom would clean Dad up, give him a shower, maybe send him to a dentist, and then have him appear on the stage of our lives. He would do a little guitar solo, and Mom would snap several rolls of film in the hope that any trace of our more painful memories would be replaced with these picturesque ones. The going rate for our father's Academy Award-winning performance? A crisp $20 bill. Staring at Sable's name, hidden under white paint, suddenly released in me a sweep of unprocessed grief I never realized I had, followed by questions about what had really happened to her, and if she ever missed me. I realized then that if I wanted to know the whole, possibly painful truth about my life, I wouldn't find it in my mother's retelling. So I began digging for the details she had left out. To my good fortune, every once in a while, perhaps due to sheer exhaustion at keeping track of so many fibs, her tender word for bending the truth, Mom would get into a short-lived mood of openness, and the truth would spill out of her like an over-poured martini. I'd seize on these moments, like a defiant child, pouncing on the crack in the sidewalk you're supposed to skip over, and ask as many pointed questions as I could, because I knew that in a few minutes the conversation would be over, and any details that brought my mother pain would later be vehemently denied.